G'day guys, this is Paul from Paulyman Astro and welcome to the second video in my Narrowband Color Palettes series. If you produce narrowband images that tend to look green and blue, like this, or perhaps you get beyond that and you produce Hubble Palette images that are blue and gold, like this, then this is the video for you. Because what I want to show you how to do is to produce true Hubble Palette images that look like this. Alright, so as you can see, the rain has been pretty incessant here on the east coast of Australia, so has the cloud. At least the last 4 months I've had zero imaging time. Things do look like they're hopefully improving. We're yet to see, but we did have a couple of clear nights there the other week. But that rain opener was filmed 3 weeks ago, I think. And I just never got around to finishing this video, unfortunately. But there were literally houses floating down the river at that point, so it was pretty insane. So in this video I'm going to do 3 things. First thing, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the science. I say a little bit more because hopefully you've seen the first episode of this Narrowband Color Palettes series, where I talked about the science of how do we name our narrowband palettes, and what do they look like, and why do they look that way, and what do the colours tell us about the stellar and indeed the galactic physics that's happening right inside our images. So the first thing I want to do is go into some more of that science and explain why we get these greens, and therefore hopefully we'll have an understanding of how we can fix it. And then in the second part I'm going to show you how to maintain a color balanced workflow in PixInsight, and then we'll do the same thing in Photoshop. They're the only 2 software packages I have, so unfortunately we won't be able to look at Astro Pixel Processor or Star Tools or Cyril or any of the other options that are out there. They're the only 2 I've got. But hopefully between the 2 of them you'll see some similarities in the way things are happening, and you can extrapolate that into your software if you don't have PixInsight or Photoshop. So let's jump into it. So here we are inside of PixInsight, and I've already got my 3 images open. It's key at this point that your images are already aligned, and if you need to do any cropping, that they're all cropped the same, so that we can overlay the 3 images and get a color image. Okay, so what I'm going to do is the first thing that we tend to do. We tend to combine these images into an RGB image. So for SHO I am going to add the sulfur to the red, the hydrogen to the green, and the oxygen to the blue. And then when I produce that image and stretch it, I am going to get an image that looks quite blue-green. I'll just adjust it slightly so it's easy to see. There we go. So it's quite blue-green at this point. There's a little bit of yellow, but for the most part it's blue-green. And that's because hydrogen has dominated the image. There's 2 ways that we can visualize this domination, this imbalance of colors. We can do it mathematically using the statistics tab. So if I look at the sulfur channel, for instance, its median is 2.8 times 10 to the negative 3, whereas the hydrogen is 6 times 10 to the negative 3, and oxygen is actually slightly brighter, 6.9 times 10 to the negative 3. The fact it's a little bit brighter than the hydrogen is probably due to the fact that it's more prone to light pollution than the hydrogen is. So if I got rid of those background gradients, I think we'll find the hydrogen would in fact be slightly brighter. Okay, but the hydrogen and the oxygen here are kind of in the same ballpark, 6.9 versus 6. Compared to the 2.8 for the sulfur, it is very much a duller image. The other way that we can visualize this, rather than just mathematics, is to use the histogram tool. So I can open up my histogram tool, choose my image, and then I can zoom in so that I can see my histograms. And you can see, as I'm zooming in here, that the blue histogram is further to the right than the green or the red. In fact, it somewhat overlaps at the other end with the green histogram, but red is very much off to the left compared to blue, and which is what we see in the image, right? Blue's dominating, green's coming in second, and there's very little red that we're seeing in our image. Okay, so they're the two tools that we can use to visualize what's going on. Okay, and what we're going to do to fix that issue is we're going to use a tool in PixInsight called Linear Fit. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use S2, our weakest channel, to match the hydrogen and the oxygen. The reason we're choosing the weakest channel is so we don't blow out our stars. So I'm going to grab my hydrogen channel and I'm going to linear fit my sulfur. And what this will do is it will move the median of the hydrogen left to right appropriately and stretch out or shrink the histogram so that it better matches the sulfur histogram. And there we are, the image got darker. We'll do the same thing to oxygen. And there we go, the oxygen also got darker. Don't panic about how the image looks. That's kind of a fake stretch at the moment, so it's nothing to worry about. Let's combine our channels now and stretch. And what we see is a much more color balanced image. And in fact, if we look at the histogram, then we're going to see that those histograms, all three of them, balance really, really nicely together, which is why we've got what we've got. So that's the purpose of linear fit. It will nicely balance those channels for you. It'll work for any narrowband image. Unfortunately, it won't always look quite this nice at this point. You might still need to do some further processing. So if we jump into Photoshop now, we'll be able to see how we can do the same thing in Photoshop, and in fact we can go a little bit further to balance those colors if necessary in Photoshop. Here we are inside of Photoshop now. So the PixInsight approach that I showed you is very minimalistic. The idea is everything is still linear. The only things that I had done to the HA, S2 and O3 before I combined them was some noise reduction and some background removal to make sure there was minimal effects of light pollution. And then we applied linear fit and combined the three channels together into a color image where the colors were now nicely balanced and we could go through a color managed workflow. I hadn't done any other processing. I hadn't even stretched the image at that point. So the PixInsight approach happens right at the start. And from there you're free to do whatever processing you want following a nice color managed workflow. Here in Photoshop things are a little bit different because of the way Photoshop works. So there's some behind the scenes work that's happened, which I actually did in PixInsight to be completely transparent. So what I've done here with this image of NGC 3576, the Statue of Liberty, in PixInsight, I combined the three channels together with no linear fit. So I just added the hydrogen, the oxygen and the sulfur together. And then I have done a very mild stretch. So this image is now non-linear, it's slightly stretched, just so that we can see it. And you can see it is quite greeny blue, as we expect for an unbalanced image. What I then did in PixInsight was use a tool called StarNet++ to remove the stars, because in Photoshop, the method we're going to employ, we need to have a starless image to work on, otherwise we're going to make the star colors all funky and weird, and we're also going to stretch certain stars more than others if we're not careful. Okay, so we do need a starless image. I am going to do a future video to show you StarNet++, so that's kind of a hidden step at the moment. So here's the image as it was in PixInsight. I then removed the stars. Okay, so this is now a starless image that we're going to work on. And the process we're going to employ is called the Histogram Balancing technique, and it was developed by Eric Cole. If you haven't seen his work, I suggest you look him up on Astro. His work is quite amazing. He's also done some talks on the Astro Imaging channel as well on this technique, so I suggest you watch them if you're interested, because it is a fascinating technique. It's also, you could call it tone mapping, where we're just working on the tonal portion of the image here. We're going to affect the colors, and we can do a separate luminance channel to do work on the luminance and then combine them together. Okay, but it is critical that we have a stretched image with no stars to start this process. So what we're going to do is a non-destructive workflow. So every time I'm going to do something, I'm going to drag my image down to the plus icon down here, which is going to make a copy of that we can do the work on. And then if I don't like it, I can always delete it and go back a step. Okay, so what we're going to do is very roughly, using the lasso tool, very roughly go around my nebulosity. Anywhere I see where it looks a bit brighter, there's some nebulosity there, I'm going to roughly travel around it. Don't have to be perfect here. Just kind of drawing all over the place here, but I've very roughly gone around where I think most of the nebulosity is. Okay, and then what we're going to do is go to Select, Modify, Feather. And for an image this size, at this scale at the moment, I'm going to feather for 300. That's what Eric tends to do at this scale, so that's what I do. So I'm going to feather that, but at the moment what I've done is select the nebulosity. For step 1, I want to invert that, because what I want to work on first is my background. Okay. To use this technique, we need to make sure we have our histogram visible, whether it's in a panel or separate, so you can have it a bit larger. We need our histogram visible, and it needs to be set to colors, so I can see my green, my red and my blue. And all we're going to do is use our levels tool on our individual colors, our individual channels, and we're just going to look at this histogram and make sure they roughly all line up. So at the moment at this scale they look pretty good. They all look like they're lining up pretty well at this point. But let's have a look. So what I tend to do for my backgrounds is bring in my black point for the channel, and then you can see the red has moved off to the left here now. I might leave it and I'll adjust the other two if I need to. So green channel I don't need to pull much in, but I can see there's a bit of green out to the right here, so I do need to adjust the midpoint. See how that's moving it the wrong way, so I want to pull it this way so it nicely lines up with the red channel. Okay, and then do the same thing for the blue. Can't really pull its black point in much at all, and then adjust its histogram so the middle of it roughly lines up with the middle of the others. Okay, so it's quite a visual, intuitive thing here rather than a strict scientific method like the PixInsight method, but they're both attempting the same thing. Okay, so if I press OK here and then I toggle that on and off, I can see two things. My background's got a bit darker and it's hard to see here, but my background has become a bit more uniform grey, which is what I want. Okay, so step 2, it's kind of an algorithm now. I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to invert that selection, so I'm working on my nebulosity now, and then I'm going to open up my levels tool again and go through the same process. So here I can definitely see for the nebulosity, green's dominating, which is what that's not surprising. Okay, so I can't really move my red's black point much, but I can move its mid-tone. So let's try and line it up with the middle of the green. So green is definitely more stretched out than the red, but that'll start fixing itself as we work through a little bit. Blue, again, I can't really move its black point, but let's try and get its histogram as much as possible lined up with the other two. That looks pretty good. So already I can see there's a little bit of color coming into it, a little bit less green than there was before. Okay, so let's deselect. Now I'm going to more carefully select the nebulosity. So I'm going to come around and I'm just going to select the brighter kind of sections. Now that fainter gas in the background I'm going to ignore for the moment. I'm just going to select all the bright stuff. I might even adjust that in a second. I just want the brighter nebulosity here. So I might even, no, we'll leave it just for the purpose of this. Okay, what I will do here though is I will feather this a bit less than I did before. This one I might do 100 pixels because it's much smaller. Okay, and again, drag that background, make sure I'm working on a new layer, so if I don't like it I can get rid of it. Bring up my levels tool, and at this point, once we're starting to work on finer and finer scales, I try and make sure this source here is changed to Selective Layer. It might not always look obviously different here, but it can make a difference as we get finer and finer. Okay, so again I can see green very much is way out here. So I'm going to drag, I'm going to stretch the red channel up to better align with the green channel, and I can already see some yellows popped out from that. Do the same thing for my blues, drag its histogram, and see if I pull too far it goes too blue. I still want to aesthetically try and keep things subtle. I don't want it too blue, so maybe that's maybe still a bit too blue. It's all in how you want things, I suppose. For the purposes of this, that looks fine. So let's deselect that. Okay, so now we've got a bit more colour in the gases and so on coming through here. And for the last little bit, because I don't want this video to go on forever, let's just select the yellows here. These little yellow tendrils of gas. Just want the yellows, nothing else. And I might feather them 50. Okay, so we're starting to work finer and finer scales as we're working our way through. I can't remember if I made a new layer, so let's make a new one just to be sure. Okay, and then my levels tool again. So work on the red, bring in that red black point, stretch out the red so it nicely matches with the green. Bring in my blue. Maybe there, for the purposes of this. And you can play around with it as much as you want to try and get that. So you can see we've already got some more complex colors starting to come in, but this is very much an aesthetics thing. It's a looking at it and making decisions by eye rather than being scientifically accurate. But it's not fake though. These colors really are there. You are just simply balancing the histograms, kind of doing a by eye linear fit to different linear fits to different areas. Almost like I was going to say dodge and burn, but not quite that. It's just working on balancing the colors in different regions the way you want them. The data's really there, you're just matching it up a little bit, but it's not as scientifically consistent as the PixInsight approach. I'll leave it there. I mean, you can keep going through. You could even work on these cyan areas here and see if you can drag some color out of that. Maybe some of the green dust in the background. Get it a little less green if you're green averse. You could do some work on NGC 3603 here. Okay, and you can just basically keep doing this iterative approach as you're going through, and then you, when you're finished, you flatten the image, and you would take it back into PixInsight and add the stars back. So I've already done that with a version here. So I have added the stars back, and I've got my final image for the color anyway. I could then do some work on a luminance channel and work on improving the sharpness and contrast within the image. So here was the original, very green-blue, and here's the final with some nicely added color. Okay, so again, this is called the Eric Cole Balance Histogram technique. You can look up his videos on the Astro Imaging channel, and it is quite an awesome technique. You can also use it in PixInsight, I must say, with the starless image and color masks and some of the other masks that are there. But it is nice and easy to work with in Photoshop. One pitfall I should mention is you do have to be somewhat careful with your choosing your black points and stretching too much to make sure you don't end up with these. See how there's these weird kind of hazy purples and so on in the background that you want to be careful of. You want to try and keep the background as much as possible uniform grey. So you do have to, when you get to smaller and smaller scales, you do have to be careful with your lasso tool, and you might maybe start moving over to range masks and color selections and so on to do your balancing histograms from that point. Okay, but I wanted to keep that fairly simple. So hopefully you've learnt how to use the Eric Cole method in Photoshop to produce something similar to the linear fit kind of method in PixInsight. Alright, so that wraps up this episode on narrowband color palettes. Hopefully you've seen how you can employ the method quite scientifically and quite early on in PixInsight, and then it's up to you to maintain the color balance workflow through your stretching and any other contrast enhancements and so on, and sharpening that you want to do. Jumping over to Photoshop, on the starless image, you can use all the power of a non-destructive workflow using layers to carefully balance the histogram at a large scale, and then slowly bring it into a smaller and smaller scale, where you may then have to move over from the lasso tool to color masking and some other techniques to try and make sure you're only stretching the nebula and not the background. Do, again, as I said, look up the Eric Cole method, jump onto the Astro Imaging channel and watch his videos on that. It's fascinating, and it is quite a powerful technique. So that wraps it up, I guess. There is a video on StarNet++ in the works, as I said. So for those watching Photoshop and missing that key kind of step in the background, there will be a video on that which will show you how to do that. Unfortunately, I only have it in PixInsight, so I'll show you how to use it in PixInsight, but the idea of using it outside of PixInsight is the same process. I think you just have to use the command line rather than kind of more drag and drop that it is in PixInsight. So thanks for watching.